getting comfortable, got my water. Hope everybody's doing well. We are going to be going over a mix that I did recently. Just checking to see if we got, by the way, got Corey on the live chat, so if you want anything answered immediately, let him know. But welcome, everybody. I appreciate you joining us. Whoever made it, awesome. If you're watching on the archive, awesome as well. I hope to definitely give you all some good information today. I got a lot of cool stuff to show you. Main goal for today is to go through this track that I recently mixed for La Mantra, which is a band that I work with, I should say, a lot. They are based out of the Dominican Republic. And the song, I just had to ask the artist how to pronounce it. Sin Arrepentimiento. There we go. Arrepentimiento. Sin Arrepentimiento. There we go. So that song is their first all-Spanish single. The band has actually, I've done about 3 EPs with the band so far, and this is actually the first single that they've done all in Spanish. So really, really cool stuff. Always love the lead singer, Ratty Ramon. He's the lead singer, the writer, basically the producer, guitar player. The guy is amazing. And the music is always just super cool, great arranging, just you'll hear it. So what we're going to do first is we're first going to listen to the final mix master of this song. And just to give you a heads up, it will be released on August 31st. So just shy of about a month and a half away, I think. Maybe a little bit more. But yeah, so look out for that. Definitely check it out when it comes out. But we're going to go ahead and take a listen. I guess you can consider this a sneak preview of it. But this is the final mix master of the next single by La Mantra. So let's take a listen.
Sensación. Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más y tu piel tocar sin arrepentimiento, tu boca besar y nunca regresar. Y en esta oportunidad tus labios Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más y tu piel tocar sin arrepentimiento, toca besar y nunca regresar. Y en esta oportunidad tus labios conquistar, tu boca besar
Nice. All right. Very, very cool. Very, very cool stuff by Lamantro. So, this was a fun project to work on. You can tell that there's a lot of influence, a lot of 80s influence. So a lot of synths. We have electronic drums, although there was a first version of this. I think he's probably saving that for a different release. There is a version with live drums, but this is the version with more of the electronic drums. Nonetheless, it was just a fun arrangement to work on. Obviously, you have the live vocals, you have background vocals, effects, tons of really cool stuff. And so the version that I'm going to show you today, I started experimenting with some really cool spatial binaural plugins, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but it's just kind of a preview of what's to come. So a lot of the things here, if you've seen my streams before regarding mixing, you'll notice that the workflow is definitely similar, but I do want to walk through the arrangement a little bit. The session in general, you'll notice that what was at the top, what I was soloing and playing for you, was the mastered version. The reason I actually did that was because I have I normally use a dual limiter in my master chain, and I bypassed the last one just to save on some processing, so I didn't have any audio glitches during the stream. But it's not a huge difference, so I wanted you though to hear the final limited version, so that's why I played that. But normally at the top of my session I might have something like the producer's last mix, and I think Ratty didn't give me, because we work so closely together, it's not like a traditional client engineer kind of scenario. So with Ratty, he sends me the Pro Tools session. I normally get my tracks in Pro Tools from him, and then I export everything, and then I mix in Ableton Live. So I didn't really have like a final mix per se, but I generally will have a producer's mix at the top of my session. In this case, I didn't. So not a huge deal. He kind of trusts my instinct, and he, of course, gave me a reference mix, which was, I believe it was a song. I think the song was called Naked Eyes, or that was the band. I'll have to look it up. I'm pretty sure that was the name of the song, but that was one of the references for the record. So I was listening to that in addition to just kind of going off the general feel that I know he likes, because we've worked on 12 or 13 songs up to this point together. So let's go ahead and look through here. We have drums. Right, we have the subgroups of the drums, subgroup of bass, we have acoustic guitars, we have our electric guitars, which there are a lot of, we have synths, we have keys, we have some vocoder tracks, we have sampled vocals, which I believe are a choir sound. If I recall, we have some effects, like there's a sound of a choir that sounds like it's starting on a tape machine. That's in the effects track. And then we have all of our vocals here. So we have lead vocals with some delays that were printed from the original session. We have harmonies. We have background vocals. We have whisper vocals. So lots of stuff. Really, really great arrangement that we were working with here, and you can hear it in the song. So, when the tracks come to me with a lot of Lamantro stuff, the sounds are kind of already there. It's not like we're trying to make things sound different than what he's giving me, but what I find is I just need to enhance things slightly, and that's the case with a lot of mixed projects. You're not finding yourself necessarily, as I like to say, reinventing the wheel with the music, because that's normally not what people want. They normally want to retain the ideas that they had and the emotional impact of those ideas, and that is the overall goal, is to enhance those ideas and give them something that is really inspiring, something that makes him really excited about the song. So I know his first reaction to the first mix was really good, and I believe a lot of the fine tuning just had to do with level, and that's very common. It's like they want to hear a little bit more of this, a little bit more of this. But when the sounds came to me, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the feel was there. I think the drums may have been something that we beefed up a little bit, and as I mentioned, we have that really cool spatial audio plugin that I'm going to mention here in a bit. But let's talk about the drums and just kind of what I did here. Now, if you're not familiar with Ableton Live, when I do select a track, you will see on the bottom, going from left to right, you'll see the inserts, similar to what you would see in Logic or Pro Tools, going from top to bottom. So that is what you are looking at, and volume and panning and things like that are on the right hand side of the screen. So that's sometimes a little takes some getting used to for some people. All right, so first I actually want to look at the drum bus first. Let's see what I have on here. So let's look at the EQ. Okay, so it's definitely got some mid-side EQ on there. So we're using the Slate. I'm not using the SSL, I'm using the Neve here, so the FGN EQ. And we got supercharger. And looks like we're at about say 25%, maybe 30% wet on that. And then let's see what else we have in here. And then it looks like we have another EQ. Okay, so let's go through these. Let's start with our first EQ. Okay, so the first, now I am skipping this stuff because this is the spatial audio stuff that I was talking about. So more on that. More on that. Now it looks like I even had another. Oh, okay, virtual tape. So let's start there. Okay, so we have our tape machine. The Slate virtual tape machine is one of my favorites. It is just by and far like an extremely colorful plugin. You put it on the sound, it generally will glue sort of your mid-range together. It really adds a nice just texture to things. And normally when I put it on, I bypass it and then I generally miss it. So we can try that right now. In fact, let's go ahead and strip this down a little bit. I'm going to bypass that. I'm going to go ahead and bypass these EQs. And let's take a listen to what this tape machine is actually doing. So I'm going to solo the drums, and let's jump into, let's say, the chorus. That's got a good drum part here. So here, let's just loop this. Okay, so let's go to the part where he actually starts playing. There we go. Okay, so if I bypass this tape plugin, now on, so I don't know if you're hearing that, but aside from a little bit of a volume boost, we are getting a bit of a thickness there. And if we go into the settings of the tape machine, you'll notice that there is something to control the bass response of this plugin. Generally, that is one of the main differences that we hear with this particular plugin, and sometimes it's enough to where I have to dial this back a little bit, but I always bring the noise reduction all the way down because I don't want to hear any tape hiss. I'm not looking for that. But, there's just a bit of almost like a compression, which tape is notorious for both its saturation properties and its compression properties, and in many cases the EQ properties, like I mentioned, the low end, but sometimes smoothing out the high end. So it kind of affects everything. But this definitely adds something, and whether I want to nitpick what that is or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just like I like what it does, and we're just going to leave it. We're going to move on. So sometimes that's all you need to worry about when it comes to this stuff. You don't have to overanalyze it so much. Now, if it's something that is detrimental, meaning that it's doing something you don't like, for example, the bass that I was talking about, I might go in the settings and dial that back and see if I can walk away with something maybe kind of nice from using that plugin. Okay, so this is basically being used as a high-pass filter. Now, let me think here for a second. Okay, yeah. I think I'm using this with the spatial audio. That gets a little kind of crazy with the routing going on here because I have, there's quite a few things happening here in terms of parallel processing. But without going too deep into that yet, let's close this. Yeah, that's actually, that high-pass filter has to do with the spatial audio. So before we get into that, let's talk about some of the processing that's being done just kind of for general processing purposes, we'll say. Let's talk about our compression. Okay, so we have our tape on there. I'm going to turn on supercharger. So first we're going to hear it without supercharger, and then I'm going to turn it on, and we're going to hear what it's doing. So here's off. So you may hear that. That is a definite change in texture. Things become more forward, more glued together. That is just the nature of compression. Now, we're only using 30%, mind you, so if I was to crank this up to 100%, we would definitely hear more of the result of that compression. And let's see, it should allow me to undo that. Yeah, so here, let's listen to it at 100% really quick. Yeah, so you hear as I'm turning it on and off, I mean, there's definitely an aggressive punch that the compression gives when it's at 100%, which is why I have it at only 30%. And that's sometimes my approach is I'll go ahead and dial in like something really aggressive, but maybe I really like the punch, or maybe I really like the way it's moving the sound, and then just kind of noting, but it's way too much, so I'm going to dial back the wet dry and then kind of get to something that feels a little bit more tasteful, and then just bypass it, turn it back on. Sometimes you need to gain match it a little bit and adjust the output gain to keep some of the energy from before you're adding the compression. So remember, compression drops the volume and makes things quieter, so the output gain is going to allow us to bring some of that energy back. Okay, now we have this EQ here. Now this looks like we're doing just a little bit of a low end bump, and this may have been done later on in the mix. These kind of subtleties many times can be a result of just balancing the low frequencies between the kick and the bass, and because the kick is really the only thing down there, I decided to do it on the on the drum bus. But that could very have easily been towards the end of the mixing stage, to where we're just fine tuning things. But that's really just all that EQ is doing, is just adding a little bit of low end. And if we look at our infinity EQ, we're actually controlling some low mids here. So we are at about the 150 hertz range, and we are using mid-side EQ. So that mid-side EQ, we should be able to hear that. Oh yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely, and here's the thing, listening to it by itself, just isolated, soloed, you might be saying to yourself, well, I like it better with the EQ off. But of course, that's out of context, right? That's in complete disregard to what's happening in the rest of the arrangement. You have the bass guitar, you have the low of the vocals, you have synths, you have all these other instruments, you have the overall sonic just kind of footprint of the track. So that's clearly, in context, a better decision than just listening to it soloed. So again, that could have been something that was done towards the end, once everything was kind of playing together, trying to just clear things up a little bit. Now remember, mid-side, and one of the things I love about the Slate Infinity EQ is this allows me to control the mid of the mid-side. So we have our mids and we have our sides of the stereo image. So middle and sides. So the middle is basically the kick, snare, vocals, everything down the middle of the stereo image. Sides are everything else, or the wides, you could think of it. So I have more of this low mid information being pulled out of the middle, and then just a little bit of it taken out of the sides. And I can do that on the Infinity EQ with this slider here. It allows me to offset the middle and the side, so I get this sort of percentage, which means that because there's a certain amount being taken out from here and a little less taken out from here, it's different than using a stereo EQ. So it's actually adding some more depth because of that difference between the middle and the side channel. So really cool stuff to experiment with if you get a chance. But yeah, it's just different than taking a stereo EQ and doing the same thing. It adds that additional depth, and depth is something that we're always looking for in our mixes. So let's talk about this Spatial plugin. Okay, I'm hoping that this is more obvious than not, but this is definitely a kind of a new thing. It's something that has been developed by a colleague of mine, and his company is called Artisans. It's spelled, I hope I don't mess it up here, ARTISYNS. Artisans.com. So yeah, ARTISYNS. SYNS. So check out that website. They have this plugin here that's called RL360. So it's a binaural plugin. Now I use the word spatial audio because it's kind of a sort of a hot word right now. Spatial audio, from what Apple is putting out, is a different thing, but it's similar. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the 2-hour conversation explaining about Atmos and all of that, but spatial audio and binaural is something that is being more experienced by the mainstream. And what I was trying to do with this plugin, so the gentleman that created this, Jeff Stone is his name, he created this plugin and asked me to try to use it in a mixing context to try to figure out, hey, like, what can this do? Do you enjoy using it? And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it was, binaural has been around for a while. It's been around for a long time. So it's not new. You can do it in Logic. But when we're working in like Pro Tools and Ableton, we don't have binaural panners that are easily accessible to us. So, and to be clear, binaural is sending the sound around your head. It's hearing things in a realistic space in relation to your head. So it's not just stereo. We hear things in stereo on sort of this like XY axis when we mix stereo music, right? And then we add that depth for that Z axis. But binaural is putting things around a 360-degree globe around your head. So it's really, really different sounding. And what I sort of like, his challenge and the challenge to myself was how do I apply this in just a stereo mix? Can I use this? Is it going to be cool? And the answer is yes. Okay, this thing gave me this depth that I feel like we always try to get in our music. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that for you right now. So basically what I have going on here, I have 2 instances of his plugin. One is essentially sending my drum bus to my right next to my left ear, the other one to my right ear. So it's you can see I got 2 instances of that plugin here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let me go ahead and mute what is basically the excuse me, I'll go on the right part here. Oh, is there a question? Hold on one second. Let me just... So I have my layers here. This is basically the dry layer, so the or we'll say the non-binaural layer, and then we have the sort of that depth that I'm talking about, that binaural layer here. So let me address this question, and then we'll get to listening. That's a really good question. That it's not anything like that. So when you're talking about the ozone imager, you're still talking about stereo processing on an XY axis. This is like I could put it behind you. And again, it's like, well, I didn't actually go into detail about this, but we're not talking about setting up multiple speakers and doing it like we would surround or even Atmos. This is just using the things that we know about how we experience sound in a real space because of our ears and the shape of our ears, and applying that so that we can give the illusion of the sound being either behind us or further away from us. Everything that's not just on that XY 2-dimensional plane that we're used to in stereo music. So check this out. This will kind of show you a little bit what I'm talking about, because I use this sound or this plugin all over the mix. So we're definitely going to see it in action today. So here is so this is the dry drums, right? This is what we've been listening to. And here's the binaural layer. So it's different, right? It feels like, now this is the thing, if you're listening in headphones, it's the most effective. And that's why, spatial audio, same thing. Spatial audio from Apple is only available in AirPods, so it decodes to spatial audio. So basically, this whole spatial audio in headphones experience is best experienced when you're listening through either headphones or some type of earbud. So if you're listening in headphones like I am, it feels like it's kind of behind you. Now I'm going to play it first dry without the effect, and then I'm going to add the effect, and I want you to hear what it adds to the drums. So this is just dry. And here's with the effect. Without it. I think my volume got tweaked a little bit here. Yeah, I think it was more like that. So without it. With it. Yeah, I think before I accidentally double clicked on my volume here, but what I did is I brought that back, so that way I wasn't getting too much of that. You heard a little bit of a delay there. Now with space we get delay, and that's why you hear that, is because to perceive distance there has to be a delay in the sound, so that's why you get that artifact. But by pulling it back a little bit, you can hear. And you might say, well, it kind of sounds like reverb. And the idea here is that we're not just going to add crazy amounts of this to one sound, right? We're going to add little bits of it to many sounds to help sort of give this sense of depth. Now, I wasn't trying to, and this was a conversation I had with the developer, I'm not trying to do what they did when stereo first came out, which was like, hey, we now have stereo. Let's put the drums in the left speaker and the vocals in the right speaker. That was like, flexing on stereo. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just add this as a nuance. And I think as a nuance, it's really cool. You get that sort of that different kind of depth that you might with a room reverb, for example. So again, here's dry. And here's with the plugin. So yeah, so it adds a really cool amount of depth, and I love it. So you'll see this more in action as we go through the mix. So that's just the drum bus, right? Let's just kind of briefly go over some of the close drums that we have here. Now I got transient master on the kick, transient master just a little bit. Looks like 17%. I choose to use transient master for punch more than compression. Because you can use compression for punch, right? You can envelope shape with compression. Just make sure that you're using your makeup gain. But compression also adds the artifacts of compression. You get that kind of sometimes that aggressiveness or a change in frequency response. Transient master is a very simple concept. You just turn up the attack and you get more attack. So, just a little bit of this is going to give us that attack. So without it, with it, without it. So you can hear a little bit of punch there. Just a little bit. And I do hear a little bit of the high mids getting boosted there, which is nice. It works. Track spacer. Love track spacer. So track spacer is being triggered by the bass. So what I'm doing here is whenever the bass plays, it is reducing a certain amount of, and I'm going to guess low frequencies here. Let's check it out. Yep, sure enough. So you can see that track spacer is taking the bass input, and every time the bass plays, it is reducing those low frequencies from the kick. Now you have to be careful with this plugin, and I say that because what you don't want is this crazy amount of low end on the kick drum, and then when the bass hits, like all the low end goes away. You have to make it sound natural, and what I'm doing here is using the amount, and it sounds, to me it worked for whatever the purpose of this mix was, but it's very easy to go overboard with track spacer, and then your sounds will start kind of fluctuating. It's like while the bass is playing, your kick is very sort of like thin and punchy, and then when the bass stops, the kick is really full all of a sudden. So it's really it's supposed to be more of a trick. It's something that you're not supposed to necessarily hear, more just feel, and that's track spacer. Really, really cool side chaining, or I should say frequency dependent side chain plugin. Now I have on here, looks like a little volume automation. That was at the end. He had a fade out, and I had to add some kicks in there on the fade out. So that's what that is. All right, snare drum. So we have this slate plugin on the snare. Looks like I'm just adding some snap, just adding a little bit of that high mid crack to it. Without it. With it. Yeah, big difference. So in the whole mix, I mean, if I turn this off, listen to the snare. Now on. It's night and day. And it's a character of the snare that really fits well in the arrangement. So I do that sometimes, and I urge you to try that as well, where you just kind of like sweep through the frequencies a little bit and just boost something that just pops out of the mix, just gives it a little bit of that texture that you like of that one sound. It works really well, especially with guitars in bigger arrangements. Hey, I didn't do squat on the hi-hat. His drum arrangement was pretty light. You know, he had like this one live hi-hat and everything else was electronic, so 4 tracks. Keeping it simple, love it. Tambourine, didn't do anything. Look, very simple. Didn't have to do any processing. Mainly kept his balance. There was a crash cymbal, turned it down a little bit. You know, a lot of the work was done on the drum bus, and it wasn't me going in saying, I'm going to do top-down mixing or whatever. It was just, and for those of you that don't know, top-down mixing is the concept of just working with the subgroups and then working your way down from that, like then going to the individual tracks. That wasn't necessarily my intention. It just worked out that way. Everything sounded good. All right, let's talk about the bass. So he's got this really cool, like, heavy synth on the bass. Sounds like this. So let's hear the raw synth, because this is kind of a cool evolution here of the sound. Here's the raw synth. Very, very different, right? It's like a lot of energy that's not there. And towards the end of the mix, he specifically requested more sub, so I'll show you how I achieved that. But let's first talk about what's happening here. So my initial instinct was to give this a little bit more edge, and one of my favorite plugins to do that is the Waves JJP bass, JJP for Jack Joseph Puig. He's a famous mix engineer, just as famous as Chris Lord-Alge, CLA. But we have actually just this plugin here is only here because I needed to do parallel processing. So in Ableton Live, it's easy to do parallel processing by basically grouping a plugin. So I just picked a plugin that doesn't add any color. There's just a utility plugin, and then that way I was able to have a parallel version of the sound. And that's because this doesn't have a mix wet dry. So Waves, if you're listening, please make a version of the JJP bass with a mix wet dry. But that's basically why I did that. And let's hear what the JJP plugin does. So this is without anything. Here's with it. Night and day. And I'm normally not a big fan of like the CLA vocal plugins or guitar plugins, but you know, this, if you're used to using those, you'll notice this looks very similar. But I do like it just because it's kind of a no-brainer, and I sometimes you just don't want to think too much about it. So it's got an edge knob, or excuse me, an edge fader, attack, width, sub, presence, length. And it's just really good. It just does exactly what you want it to do. So I highly recommend checking this plugin out. But yeah, that's all it does. It gives us that edge. It gives us some punch, gives us some width, some sub, some highs, and the length is that sustain of the sound. So super cool, easy to use plugin by Waves. Now let's look at our EQ here. So this EQ looks like we're adding some, so we are shaping the sound with this. Okay, we have some edge that we're adding with this, we have some tone that we're adding with this, and then we're taking away some of the sub frequencies to balance that out, more than likely, you know, with the kick, and just keeping things a little bit more balanced, less aggressive. Well, not less aggressive, but less wild in the low end, right? It's all about balancing frequencies. You'll hear me use that term a lot. So let's hear it without it. This is without the EQ. And here's on. Let's hear it in context. So here's off.
Y en esta oportunidad tus labios conquistar.
Let's meet the vocals. Goes off. Goes on. Yeah, I mean, if you're focusing on the bass, it's night and day. I mean, you lose all the energy. It's just like with the snare drum. This is helping that raspiness pop out. This tone, I'll boost this up. You can hear what it's doing. So when I pull it back, obviously it sounds more natural, but excuse me, when it's boosted, you can hear it's that sort of boxier range of frequencies that if we had it too much, it would in fact be boxy, but just a little bit just kind of adds a little bit of a nice texture to it that just works. So that's really cool. And then, like I said, this is definitely bouncing back the lows, which is a little counterintuitive to the next plugin, which is the Brainworks subfilter. If they still have these plugins for free on Plugin Alliance, you should check it out. They had a package that they were giving away for free. More notably, the Shadow Hills compressor, this one, and then a few other ones, like a nice console. I think it was a Focusrite console. So a lot of really cool stuff that they're giving away. But this plugin, Ratty, the lead singer, was basically asking for more sub. He needed it. It was one of the very last notes that he gave me for this mix. So this definitely helps add that. So let's hear it with and without. So here's without it. With it. Without it. With it. Yeah, and in the arrangement, it just kind of gives that added push on the bottom. I know what he meant when he said he was really missing that low end, so it made sense. Now, this does something different than adding a low EQ. For years, I went without using these subharmonic generators, but that's what this is, and it's very effective. It's very good. So yeah, it's the Brainworks subfilter. All right, looks like on my little subgroup here, I have a subgroup even though I don't need a subgroup. I had one on there for organizational purposes, but looks like because this track is going into here, this is definitely going to affect what's happening. So we have some, oh look, we have tape, yay. So the tape is going to be adding some texture. Look what I did here, I actually brought back the bass alignment, so that's that low response I was talking about. I mean, think about it. We got like a lot going on here in terms of bass management, right? We got the JJP bass is adding sub. I was definitely using that. We have the sub filter adding sub. We have the tape machine adding sub. We have, let's see what else. And then the TDR Nova, I bet you, is controlling the sub. Yeah, there we go. That's controlling the sub. And let's talk about that for a minute, because that you might be looking at me going like, well, okay, well then why did you add all the sub if you're controlling all of this sub? And understand that the purpose of these plugins, the subharmonic generator, right, the tape machine, these are adding color. These are adding the meat of the sound, right? And then TDR Nova is there to control the balance of frequencies within the arrangement. That's a different thing. So could I have brought the low end of the tape machine back and have done the same thing? No, I couldn't have, because TDR Nova moves with the arrangement. It's a dynamic plugin, which is different than, say, just adding an EQ to cut or to balance back the low frequencies. So they all do have a purpose. And don't get me wrong, there's things where I've done in the past where it's like I could have just done this and I would have saved myself some work. But in this case, it definitely makes sense. So we have, generating low frequencies, adding color and generating low frequencies, adding, some harmonic distortion a little bit, some saturation. And then we have this controlling the low end in the arrangement so that way it's not overpowering things. The limiter, the overall mix. And then we have this compressor here. Let's see what this is doing. So it's in stereo mode. More than likely, we're looking at gain reduction here. So more than likely, this is just adding a little bit of control over the dynamics of the bass. Let's check it out. So remember, the name of the game with a lot of this stuff, this isn't like a rap record, right? This is something that's a little bit more, I only use the word tasteful because I'm not dissing on rap music. I'm just saying that rap music definitely has a more aggressive feel. And albeit this is a loud record, as loud as most trap, like rap records you're going to hear, this definitely has more of an air of a natural kind of texture to it. So we can't just get away with oversaturating everything and over distorting things. We have to use things with sort of that natural feel in mind a little bit. So I guess the reason why I'm bringing that up is because this compression, this here, right? When you apply these things, you have to hear it in the mix. You want to be able to listen and make sure that it sounds like it fits. Don't just over compress this and crank up the output gain just for the sake of compression. No, like the reason it's on there is because the bass has a dynamic movement to it that it kind of ebb and flows. It gets a little bit louder, it gets a little bit quieter, and this is to help control that and help it sit in pocket in the mix. So we want to do that in a way that doesn't sound like it doesn't fit, and that's sort of the challenge of this kind of music, is to make everything work. You'll notice TDR Nova again on the low end. Now I'll bypass this. Yeah, crazy low end. So remember, this is acting almost as a multi-band compressor. I'm looking at the... No, I didn't put a flanger on the synth to answer your question. Yeah, we always need more sub in regards to your chat there. But yeah, the idea here is that we're doing this to, I mean, think about it. If I did it too much, it would thin the bass out. If I didn't do it enough, we wouldn't have the control that we're looking for. But turning things up, like adding low frequencies and then hitting a processor like this, isn't necessarily a bad move. You got to try this stuff out. You'll only know if you try it out. Okay, let's hear the acoustic guitar. So we have... Let's see, it looks like here on the acoustic, we'll probably have some EQ. Yep. So one of my go-to compressors is the LA2A. So this is Slate's version of the LA2A. We got some high boost, high mids, some mid-range, doing lots of boosting here for character. So let's hear first without any of the processing on the acoustic. Here's with it. So obviously a volume change there. Let's go ahead and I'm gonna do something for you here. Let's gain match this. That way we can really hear the difference between what's happening. There we go. So this is without. And here's with. Right? Beautiful thing. I mean, that's with acoustic guitars, especially in this setting, we really want to get that punch. We need to give it attitude. and the tone of the acoustic. I remember one of the challenges in this song was to get that acoustic to really pop through the arrangement. So here, let me take off my gain matching plugin. If I mute this acoustic guitar in the arrangement, listen to what it's doing. So I don't know if you caught it, but it's almost like a percussion instrument. It's a tonal percussion instrument, and you got to hear the sound of the pick. So really a lot of this boosting here was absolutely done in the mix, because pushing up this high end right here is to get us to hear more of that pick, and then pushing this stuff up here is to give it a little bit more edge. This is that tone, like what makes it sound like an acoustic guitar. Like I'll boost it and show you. Right? Right, so that boxy tone, it's this similar to what I was adding to the bass, but not the same frequency, but that is absolutely just tone, okay? So we're just filling in the holes at that point, and definitely more effective to do with the arrangement going. Now this LA2A, someone showed me this years ago, and it's been my go-to ever since. It's just the way to add attitude to the acoustic guitar. The optical compressor just has that kind of vibe to it, so you're going to get that attitude that's not too aggressive, but if you need to make it aggressive, you just compress it more. Not so much to overthink here, which is great, and that's kind of why I like it. So it just works. So LA2A on the acoustic guitar, that's how you get that attitude. Looks like Daniel's got a question here. Yeah, the virtual channel strip is, and I appreciate that. Oh, I see. Had a nice compliment back there. Thank you. The virtual channel strip, a lot of the reason why I pick things are because I guess I could say two reasons. Aside from the fact that it might sound good, but it's easy to use, and it's just convenient. So I make a preset. I'm just starting to use other EQ plugins that in a future project I'll show you that coming up here. But this Neve EQ is just sounds great. And if I have a reason to use anything else, like for example, if I need the functionality of a mid-side EQ, or I mean, look, there's no Q adjustment on this. I don't have to overthink bandwidth, which is awesome. I just turn it up and select the frequency, or turn it down, and I'm good. Whereas if I need to think about Q, if I need to think about mid-side, then I go for the Infinity EQ, or I go for the FabFilter Pro Q3. Like those are functionally different plugins, but these types of plugins, the SSL that Slate has as well, like those plugins are going to give us the color. And if I'm working on like rock stuff, like that, this is going to give me definitely a tone that people are familiar with. But it's all kind of just one and the same to me. So definitely convenience, functionality, and just sort of ease of use. Now, they also have things like the LA2A. So if I'm doing an acoustic guitar, it's like, okay, I know I'm going to use an LA2A. I know I need like a nice analog modeling EQ. So the VMR is going to have that kind of baked into it. And I have a preset. Like I'll show you what it looks like. I made a preset in Ableton that looks just like this. See? I got a Slate EQ, I got a Neve EQ, and I have a console emulation. Done. So super simple, easy for me to bring up. And I guess it keeps me on the subscription. But yeah, so that's the acoustic guitar. Remember, it's a tonal percussive element. Now the guitars, there were so many guitars in this. And this is where we're going to start seeing some of that spatial audio stuff. This was a cool effect he did. Okay, let's just look here. Yeah, the guitar does really cut through, and that's one of the things acoustic guitars, we try to get that cut in the cut. What was that, Corey? Oh, did I not address that? Oh yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, so let's go ahead and now there is a Spatial, that binaural plugin being used on here. Let's start first with just some basic guitar plugin or guitar processing, I should say. Let's first look at our rhythm guitars. Okay, so let's solo and hear what they sound like. Now something that we have to understand is that guitars are definitely some of the harder things to work with. In my experience, I hear people making their guitars very thin and bright, and I urge you to explore more of the tone of the guitar, the body of the guitar, even the low mids of the guitar, because there's a lot there that really adds to the weight, depending on the arrangement, depending on the writing, of course. But, you know, this guitar, let's just take a look here at what we're doing. So you'll start seeing some patterns for sure. Like we're not even using this plugin, so I could just delete that. But here's that Neve EQ going into a distressor. Okay, why a distressor? It's going to give me a little bit more aggression, gives me a little bit more control than the LA2A because we have attack and release times. We do have some other sort of saturation options as well, but this definitely gives me a little bit more. But the distressor to me just gives me more. If I want attitude, I go for the distressor as just kind of a habit, if you will. And it can move. The thing is, optical compressors like on the LA2A are very slow moving, so we can't control the release times of those, whereas the distressor we can. So we can get even more aggressiveness out of that. So yeah, let's take a listen to this in the chorus. So without them. And again, if we gain match this really quick, we'll get a little bit better of a feel of what the processing's actually doing. Yeah, it's almost like we're flip-flopping the sound, right? We're bringing that mid-range out. So without the gain change, right, when we compensate for that with this plugin here, we hear the change in the frequency response. So we are really we're taking a sound that's like this and we're doing this to it. And then we're also adding that punch. And the distressor is definitely helping with that punch factor. Now the EQ is before the compressor. So remember that just like with the acoustic guitar, the EQ is pushing into the compressor and further influencing how that sound is being shaped. Right, there's two different ways you can do that, right? You can shape the sound with the compressor and then EQ what that's doing, or you can create what I like to do is create more of a reactive nature between the EQ and the compressor by EQing into the compressor. That way, if I want that punch to be brighter, check it out. Right, so that actually changes the shape or where that punch is occurring. It's now more on the high end, and that doesn't happen when you do the EQ after the compressor because the compressor isn't influenced by the EQ when it's after the compressor. So, yeah, really cool stuff. But we can see here's that mid-range boost right here. We can see the low cut where we're balancing back those lows just because we don't need them, especially with all the guitars that we got going on. So that's basically what's going on there. Now the compressor, let's take the compressor off, hear what it's doing. Here it's kind of tame, kind of chill. So without it. With it. Yeah, I mean, this is a beautiful job of bringing out that strum, and that's because, the attack time is set right. We're not over-compressing, right? We're not over-compressing. So when you're doing this stuff, make sure that you're gain matching what you're doing so that the gain isn't different between the uncompressed and the compressed. And actually listen and ask yourself, is it doing what I want it to do? And you'll be surprised how little goes a long way. So let's get rid of this, and let's move on to the next sound. So there were a lot of guitars in this track. I mean, we had layers of the same thing. We had these sort of strummy sounds right here. So you're starting to see my habits here, right? So we got some high end. We're just chilling out the high end, smoothing it out, right? You don't have to go compressing everything to control it, right? Use some EQ. So I'm smoothing out the high end. I'm adding some more of that high mid. I'm adding more of that mid. So without it, it sounds like this. Right, so there's some really, really nice mid-range that can cut through the mix. If we take that off while we're listening to the song, listen to how the guitar kind of disappears. Yeah, to be honest, it's not one of those things that are night and day. But it's enough to where the artist may say, like, can you turn that up? So sometimes EQ is better than volume, not always, but definitely one thing to try out. So we have this melody, which was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 different layers on top of the delays that he gave me that were printed from the Pro Tools session. So we got a lot of stuff going on here. Now this is where we start exploring that spatial audio stuff, the binaural. I want to be clear that I'm saying binaural. I say spatial just because it sounds cool, but it's not the true spatial audio that Apple's doing. It's related, but it's not exact. So I'm going to say binaural from now on. So I'm using the binaural plugin on this melody in some instances. But let's first talk about the more kind of obvious processing here. It looks like this wasn't used. I think he made a comment about, because you can use saturation at times to increase, whether you're trying to EQ something, you're trying to add high end, you're trying to add warmth. You can use plugins that will focus that saturation on those ranges and actually do a similar thing. But he kept saying that he kept hearing a crunch, so I was like, let me take that off. So I ended up just just adding a high boost. So simple high boost without it. Without it. Yeah, and again, like in the mix, you can hear that if I take this away, we'll lose some of that presence. Right, here's with it. Kind of like related to Daniel's question, like notice I used this stock Ableton EQ as opposed to the Neve one that Slate has, and it's just because it was easy to use. It was like I just need a high boost. I don't really know what I want to do yet, but it was as easy as taking this and just grabbing a node and just going. But all right, so let's check out some of this spatial stuff, this binaural stuff. Let me see here. Because it does sound really cool. If you take a listen to it soloed, like listen to the depth that we have in this melody. It just sounds really cool. I wish, the song was, I wish I was able to just play that, but unfortunately that's not the case. It's part of the arrangement. So as a nuance, right, we hear that kind of cool depth happening behind us a little bit. And let's talk about how we got there. So I think on this one, let me just unfreeze this. Actually, I'm going to see if I have here. Yeah, let's see what this does to our processing. So this is just one layer. Okay, so without it, we can obviously hear it as a more of a mono sound source. It's much quieter. Let's gain match that. Let me think about this for a second, because we do have some, looks like we have some automation happening here. Yeah, looks like I have a little bit of automation happening. Here, let me just add a few dB. Here we go. Okay, and here's with the binaural. So not only am I moving it to one side of your head, but it's also behind you a little bit. So, you know, if I move this around, really cool stuff. So it's not like I'm trying to do this freakishly crazy stuff. It's a nuance, right? Would I pan that guitar slightly if I was just using a stereo panner? Yeah. Would I add some reverb to potentially give that a little bit more space and depth? Yeah. Would I mess with EQ and volume? Yeah. So it's like this is, in a way, doing a lot of that stuff, but as a sort of a one knob thing, and also in a field that I can visualize. So I think it's a really cool new approach for me, at least, to add this interesting depth. I'm curious if I undo this, will it put it in the same place? Yeah, it looks like slowly but surely. Yeah, I'm not going to sweat it if it's a little different. That's fine. Cool. So that is what I'm doing with that instance of the plugin. Now we have another instance here. So these are delays. These are actual delays that were printed from the Pro Tools session. So let's go ahead and check this out. So again, I have a stereo instance this time. I'm not using just a, so look at that, I have it kind of one side of the delay all the way in the back by the wall, and then the other by the corner of the room in the back wall as well. Just seeing what we have here. So, you know, the concept of parallel processing in Ableton Live is just, you know, it's just it's built into the software. It's very easy to do. So that's why you see me doing this utility plugin, as I mentioned earlier with the drums, and then I have a layer of this spatial audio. And actually, it looks like what I'm doing here is I'm blending the dry into it. So I'm actually leaning more into the spatial effect, and then I'm blending the dry in, probably to give it a little bit of presence. So let's hear it. Let's just hear the dry sound without any of the binaural. Okay, and here's with it. Very cool. So understand that we have so many layers of this melody that I can afford to take one of those more drier sort of upfront sounds and put it in the back. So this isn't something that I would do with a lead vocal, you know, maybe a copy of a lead vocal, but it's definitely a layer. So take it for what it's worth, but that was the intention there, was to make that spacey kind of layer to blend underneath all these other layers that we have here of the same melody. And there's some higher octaves and lower octaves, but it's essentially, you know, the same part. Awesome. So I do have some compression on that sound, just because, just a little bit of texture, a little bit of attitude. Yeah, it's just kind of gluing that together a little bit for us, just bringing all of that dynamic range a little bit closer together to hear the effect more clearly. But if I was to mute that one layer, I'm curious if we're even going to hear like a big difference. So here's the melody group soloed. Let's mute it while it's playing. It's there like a subtle reverb would be there. So that's my take on it. This one, on the other hand, let's hear what this sounds like when we mute it. Oh, that's a major part of the sound. Yeah, so this one's definitely more substantial, as part of the forefront of the sound. So I guess we'll give the RL 360 plugin a lot of brownie points for that one, because it definitely is heard, at least on that layer. Awesome. So we got some printed delays here, and so this idea of sort of starting from scratch when the artist gives you tracks, like, that's not my way. My way is to take the ideas they gave you, especially guitar delays. Guitar delays are something you just do not want to have to recreate, especially when they spent so much time, their own time, creating that in terms of timing and emotion. So I just print what they have, and that way I can balance it in, I can adjust it. If I really have to recreate it, I'll recreate it, but that's rarely the case. Okay, let's jump into synths. So there's definitely some cool stuff happening here with the synths. Okay, check this out. Definitely using the binaural plugin here. Now, something that the developer of the plugin told me to do, and this is interesting, right? Remember that sense of space that we get with binaural is also dependent on frequency response. So when something goes behind you, it gets darker. So what he told me was like, well, if I put the EQ after the plugin, it will essentially change that effect, which isn't what I was trying to do. He said put the EQ plugin before the binaural plugin, and then it's just basically giving you an EQ'd version of the sound going through the binaural space. So if that makes sense, if we want to preserve that illusion of the effect of things being around our head, we want to keep the EQ before that plugin. So we can see that I did add some presence using about 3K here, some of that tone that we've been talking about. Look at all that low mid I'm adding. I'm adding everything here. Let's go through these. So first, let's hear it without the binaural plugin. I'm just curious what this sounds like. Okay. So, I used it as a panner. Look at that. I just put it right next to my right ear, or your right ear, I should say. But that's pretty cool because I'm using it as a panner, but I'm getting depth at the same time. It's like a panner on steroids. It's just super cool. So I'm getting that depth right along with the panning that I'm doing with this. So let's look at this EQ. So we're adding low mids for body. If I take it away, it gets thin. Definitely gets thin without it. Okay, then we got our tone here. Little difference. You get some dimension there. Okay, then we got some high mids. Definitely lose some presence there. Yeah. Get that. That's the bite of the synth. That's 3K. That's air. So these two bands are doing similar things to me, but definitely you can hear how each thing is adding its own kind of character to the sound, and that going through the binaural plugin gives us that really cool space. So I mean on all these synths, it looks like I used this binaural stuff. And I do want to make my way to the vocal here. I know we're already past 8, so let's go ahead and a couple cool things I want to show you beforehand is just I did some automation. Okay, let's address the question first. I'm not, and that's a good point, Daniel. So, is there one before that? Let's see. Okay, good call. Yeah, so the question is, am I not gain matching the EQ boost? And I'm not, because, and that's a really, really great point, because like with compression, I might do that. Remember that sometimes, especially when the mix is already going, the goal is for me to make something heard more, not necessarily to judge whether the processing is doing. Because remember, one of the points of gain matching compression is to hear what the compression's doing, and in some cases to preserve the gain staging that you've already started, like the balance of the sound in the mix or something similar to that. Whereas in this case, we're now dealing with potentially adding character to help it pop through the mix, which is an alternative to pushing the fader up. So really the gain change there is almost like turning, the fader up on that part of the sound. So I hope that makes sense. It's not something that I can say always do this here or always do this here. I will say that I rarely gain match my EQ, although I have tried it sometimes. But it's definitely just something to keep in mind. Keep aware. I mean, if you're adding 12 dB of something, then yeah, you probably want to pull your gain back a little bit, using some means to to match that, at least compensate for it. But if you're just adding like a dB and a half, you might not need it. But again, always be aware. The fact that you did it and that you're adding that energy in the mix and your gain staging is definitely worth noting. So really, really good question. Always be aware. All right, so let's talk about this automation here that we did. This is cool. Let's see, that is not the automation. Let me find the spot here. I think it's right. I'm thinking of a part where, oh, here, maybe this is it. Yeah. Yeah, so I got to show you what this thing is doing. So this is automating this plugin. I can't. So automating this plugin is not an easy feat, because when you move things, multiple parameters are moving at once. So check this out. So you see what it's doing? So it's basically moving. It's moving like in front of my face and then back around. And it's like creeping along my face, which is pretty cool. So just getting some of that depth, that movement, but also with that added binaural depth effect that comes with it. And I mean, you can see in the plugin, if you want to dive into this, azimuth and distance, and you can play with elevation, and there's surface distance, so the size of the room that you're actually moving around in. There's a lot of cool stuff. There's presets for reverbs. Awesome plugin, but that's using some automation with that plugin. I did it also with that guitar right here. Check this out. Oh, why is that muted? Oh, because, give me a second here. There we go. This guy. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. It's a good moment in the song. Not trying to make things too weird throughout the track, but having these moments where it's like, okay, now we can play with some panning and try doing something cool and see if the artist likes it. And yeah, he really did. All right, let's talk about vocals. So we've been talking a lot about the binaural stuff. I don't want to, that is cool, right? But we are here to also just talk about regular mixing, right? And just making stuff pop. Let's just talk about the lead vocal here. Let's go into the verse. Take a listen.
Esa dulce sensación. Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más y tu piel tocar sin arrepentimiento, tu boca besar.
Yeah, so I love the way this vocal came out. Just it has such a cool, I use the word depth a lot, but depth gives us that sense of dimension, right? I mean, he's here, but then there's like stuff happening back there. And yes, I use the binaural plugin on some stuff with him, but I will say that one of the important things in here that I do a lot is this boosting of this mid-range, just enough to where you get him to feel like he's got more of that body, more of that tone. So here, I'll bypass this. I want you to hear how you lose that energy.
Dándome en tu cama, esa dulce sensación. Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más y tu piel tocar.
So this is with it.
Dándome en tu cama.
Without it.
Dándome en tu cama.
With it.
Dándome en tu cama.
So there's like this edge that you get that's just, it's not too aggressive, it's not too muddy. Find that in your sounds and see if you can just add a little bit of that. It does add dimension. Now he has a really cool slap echo effect, which you can hear it. If I bypass his effect, you'll hear his voice change.
Dándome en tu cama.
Very dry, right?
Esa dulce sensación.
And then here's the effect on.
Dándome en tu cama.
So it's just a cool slap echo effect or slap back delay. And you can see I used Echo Boy. You can normally find, the effect is going to live somewhere between 100 and 200 milliseconds. I'm using the EQ to give me more of that old telephone kind of EQ with the high and low pass filters. And then we have, looks like I'm even emphasizing that more here. I'm just cranking up like 1.5K. And then we have just more, just to make it cut, just adding some high end. And then here's that Spatial plugin. I'm actually using that. And if I just solo the effect and take that off, you'll hear what it's doing. So this is without it. Here's with it. Without it. With it. So it's definitely adding that depth, but it's also darkening it a little bit, and it's probably the reason why I added this high-end boost to make it more heard. But just, an attempt to add a little bit more depth to a cool track, to a cool vocal. I know I did a little of that binaural automation on this sound. Okay. So, this was a vocal double. Which again, you see, I mean, like I said, this project, I really wanted to experiment with that plugin, and I think it worked well. I didn't have to compress his vocal a lot. Like, that's kind of cool, you know? Like, I really just had EQ. I didn't use this console emulation. Let's look what's happening on the, even on the vocal subgroup. There's not a lot of compression on there. Okay, but let's look at this lead subgroup. So this is where we have tape. So we talked about that, right? Let's see how hard we're hitting this tape. So we're not slamming the tape, but we're definitely hitting it a little harder based on the input level. Let's look at the compression. Right here.
Y en esta oportunidad tus labios con.
Yeah, so we got like almost 100% of our compression happening here. Yeah, so it is 100%. But we have like 4 dB of gain reduction. This compressor is very colorful. Plus I'm adding some saturation to it. So without it, it's going to sound like it has less attitude. Let's bypass the effects here.
Y en esta oportunidad tus labios conquistar.
I'll gain match it for you.
Let's
go into the chorus. Sorry, bridge. Nope, second verse. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right section here. So second verse.
Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más.
So here's without the compressor.
Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más.
Here's with it.
Quiero regresar a tu lado, estar solo una vez más.
Okay, so if you're hearing that, you're hearing this this attitude. That's all it is. He gave me a vocal. It sounded a little sterile, and I need to make it interesting. So using the supercharger plugin is going to help me out with that. And then this right here, this saturation, is a very, very nice sort of addition to that as well. It's going to help emphasize that compression effect a little bit, and it's going to just kind of make it, just gives it a little bit of something interesting. Awesome. So harmonies, if we just look at the, yeah, looks like I'm cutting some mid-range here, probably because it's clashing a little bit with the lead. Remember, if you're boosting something with the lead, you pull that back a little bit in another vocal that's singing at the same time, you're going to create a little bit of depth between the two. You just don't want to make the other vocal sound freakishly deficient in that frequency. So you got to balance. Micro shift, kind of a cool chorusing effect plug-in. So let's see, without it, let's go to a section where they're singing. Here we go. Okay, and here's with it. Just a little modulation. Yeah. Yeah, I hate to say it, but a lot of times it's just to make it interesting. That's all it is. See, and look, there's nothing. Most of the processing was done on the subgroup. See, I'm just adding volume here. That's just a fader. And then I'm just doing that little bit of EQ reduction there. Some low mids, taking those out. A little bit of presence in the high end. Subtleties. Subtlety. Okay. Background vocals. Yeah, we got some compression happening there for energy. EQ after compression. Why? Just because. I didn't overthink it. But I chose to put the EQ after the compressor. There's that boost again. Adding that body. Taking out some of that harshness in the high end. And then we have the compression for attitude. Right? If we go to a section where they're singing. If I bypass these, yeah, it's not even that dramatic of a change. I can guarantee you that this boost here is helping it actually be heard more in the mix because of that tone. But it's subtle. It's subtle. That's what this is all about. Do these subtleties. I'm telling you, it'll transform your mixes. Yeah, and just a high pass filter on the whisper track. This is one of the beauties of this. What I really, really like about this whole process is that we overthink this stuff when we learn it. We try to do it. We try to beat people's heads in with compression and high pass filter on everything, and which there's some truth to that. But the amount that you do, do enough just to make sense. Do enough to where you hear it. Try to have a goal in mind and try to reach that goal. So that's some food for thought in terms of mixing in general. But I'm not gonna. I'll save the master chain stuff. We could do a whole nother masterclass just on the master chain. Now remember the things here that are really important, right? We have a great arrangement. We have great writing. We don't want to. When you're working for a client, you don't want to transform their sounds to the point where they lose the original intent, right? The original impact of those sounds. You want to make sure that you're respecting that, especially when you're, with Ratty, with everybody I work with, I respect them immensely, but it's just really important to respect where they're coming from. So don't just take what they got and just completely transform it, because that's not normally what they want. Listen to what they had, and then ask for references to understand their goal. And that will educate you into what you should be doing to get there. You'll notice that over compression is probably something they did in the production process if that was their intent, whereas in the compression we're doing in the mixing is really more just for nuance, subtle attitude, subtle control. right? The bass was an example of really transforming the sound, because we had something that sounded a little sterile and we wanted to make it more interesting, and that JJP plugin really helped, bring that to life. And then EQ, this binaural plugin, like these nuances are what add up to make things amazing. I say that over and over and over again, because when I listen to mixes by producers, they're not bad. That's the thing. People are not giving us mixes that are like these just, oh God, I need to just do so much to this. No, they're not bad. So what you end up doing, whether it's your own music coming from your production or whether it's someone else's music, more than likely you are going to be dealing with nuances to help get it to that last, we'll say 20% from where they are to where they want to be. So like I said, we can get more into the mastering stuff in another stream. Most of the work, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, right? The bulk of the work is going to be in the mixing, balancing of your frequencies, adding the different textures and characters to the sounds, and your depth, your balance of frequencies, your width, your panning, your interaction in the arrangement. Those types of things are going to be in the mix. So take that as you will. I wish everybody the best. I'll go ahead and we'll play out with the song that we were working on today while we say farewell. But yeah, I really appreciate everybody showing up. We are going to do another one of these next week, and I guess kind of keep an eye on my Instagram feed for that. But just a couple things for you to check out. Definitely check out that artisan.com page. As I said, it's ARTISYNS, artisans.com. Check out colormindmusic.com for all the great stuff Corey has going on there. Also, we will be archiving this and putting this on his YouTube channel as well. So Color Mind Music, look up that on YouTube, subscribe to that, please. And also spread the word about these, all right? You can check out my site, markbarrymusic.com. And just keep an eye out for these. You are always more than welcome to DM us on Instagram, either myself or Corey, if you have any questions, follow-up questions. And we look forward to everybody coming to future events, future streams. So I appreciate everybody. Take care, keep making great music, and we will talk to you in the next stream. Take it easy, everybody.